the notice of the proposed tax rate that was published in the newspaper and is available on the city's website. The second action to be taken, and the final adopted rate can be lower than this rate but cannot exceed it. The second action, which will be taken after the 2 public hearings on the tax rate, is the actual adoption of the tax rate, which will take place on September 19th at 5:30 p.m. here in the council chamber. This chart shows the various tax rates that we have discussed up to this point. The maximum impact of the approved GO bonds, which is a 3.1 cent increase from the city's tax rate at the time of the bond election, is 33.995 cents. The maximum rate, those are the GO part bonds, yes. The tax rate in the published notice, as I mentioned a moment ago, is 33,007, and that is the effective tax rate plus 3% with an additional 0.774 cents for our sales tax recovery to make up for the decrease in the sales tax for property tax reduction that we've received over the last 12 months. The effective tax rate plus 3% is 32.233 cents. That is the rate which, based on the financial management policy statements, would fund the budget as proposed. The current tax rate is 31.595 cents. And then our calculated effective tax rate, thank you, I was told I wasn't ever supposed to touch the microphone, so I didn't touch it this time. The calculated effective rate for 2017 is 31.293 cents, and on the next slide, I'll define what exactly that means. And the rollback rate, which is the maximum rate that can be adopted without a petition for an election, is 33.352 cents. So state law governs this process that we're going through right now. This is commonly referred to as the Truth in Taxation Law. It dictates the calculations that must be done, the publications that must be done, including the language and the terminology that must be used. The effective tax rate is the basis for this whole process. What is the effect? Whoa, okay. I didn't do it. I didn't touch anything. Should I just click on that slide? Okay. All right. Okay, so the effective tax rate is a calculation that would generate the same tax revenue in 2017 as the current tax rate did in 2016 for properties taxed in both years. It's all about tax revenue, and it basically wipes out the impact of revaluation. The city's financial management policy statements dictate or direct for the city manager to recommend a tax rate that meets the city's finances, that the city's finances require in order to operate efficiently yet effectively, and meets the city council's expectations of services provided and service levels. And then it further states that as economic conditions permit, the city manager would recommend a tax rate not greater than the effective tax rate plus 3%. Unless the voters have approved a GO bond election and the city's implementing that. The fiscal year 2018 budget is based on a revenue stream for property taxes built around the financial management policy statement direction, which is the effective tax rate plus 3%. And that is 3% is to account for increases in the cost of doing business. The calculation of the tax rate of 32.233 cents times the certified taxable values, which were lower than the 3% revaluation that we had anticipated going into the budget, is what gives us the revenue that's necessary to fund the proposed budget. The slight increase in the tax rate offsets the lower values on the final tax roll and produces the revenue that's necessary to fund the budget. And this is consistent with policy direction. Going into this year's budget, we recognized that the city's sales tax revenues were showing a decline over the prior year, even more than anticipated due to the end of an incentive agreement last year. Through July, sales tax is down 7.7% year over year, and this breaks down in the major categories that you see here. while retail trade, which makes up between 43 and 47% of collections, depending on which year you're looking at, is only down about 1%. Food and entertainment, which only makes up 12 to 14%, is up 10% compared to the prior year. That's a result of the Smart Financial Center and the overflow into our restaurants that we're realizing. The remaining 35 to 40% is where we're really seeing an impact. And these are all down about 9% over last year. This is primarily due to the impact of the oil industry, where companies in Sugar Land that make products to serve the oil sector are way down. The wholesale trade is the result of the incentive agreement ending, and then we're also seeing an impact in the information sector. Based on this data that we had and the direction from the City Council in March, we built a sales tax budget for fiscal year 18 with no growth over the fiscal year 17 projections. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the decline in sales tax is a tax rate equivalent of 0.0774 or 0.774 cents. The fiscal year 18 budget was prepared with a very conservative approach. The budget moves rehabilitation funding into the general fund at a reduced level from where it was funded previously in the capital projects fund. At that point, it was being funded from sales tax. And as we've realized in fiscal year 17, we've had to cut back our pay-as-you-go funding because of the decline in sales tax. So we're looking for a more stable funding source. We've moved that into the general fund. We pushed out existing capital projects from the next 4 years in our current 5-year CIP and plan to fund them over 5 years instead. We increased the salary savings offset in the budget to help balance it. We captured and incorporated savings from things like electricity, fuel, and HOA reimbursements for landscaping. The departmental assessments conducted by OSI, which is the Office of Strategic Initiatives, resulted in efficiencies that we have incorporated into our processes. And there's no pay-as-you-go funding from sales tax for capital projects this year. And additionally, there are no discretionary additions to the budget outside of annexation. The general fund is the fund that supports most common city services, including police, fire, and public works. Revenues to support this fund are shown on this chart. Including the allocation of 18.392 cents on the proposed tax rate at the effective rate plus 3%, which only makes up 25% of the revenues in this fund. Sales taxes make up 41%, so you can imagine a year-over-year decline of 7% on something that is between 40 and 50% of your revenue stream can have a substantial impact. Overhead allocations and reimbursements from other funds, which is the purple at 8%, and then our annexation-related funds are 8%, and other taxes are 7%. The remaining 10% is made up of charges for services, fines and forfeitures, and licenses and permits, all of which are down from last year. The debt service fund, which is responsible for paying the city's outstanding debt obligations, has 60% of fiscal year 18 funding coming from the city's property tax levy, which is an allocation of 13.841 cents on the tax rate out of the effective plus 3. The MUD districts from Greatwood and New Territory that have outstanding debt payments will levy a property tax for 2017 that makes up 20% of our budgeted revenues, along with 5.7% coming from their remaining fund balances. The remaining 13.6% comes from transfers in from the utility fund, transportation fees, and tourism fund to support debt obligations directly related to those functions. Based on the proposed budget, if the city ends up adopting a tax rate less than the effective tax rate plus 3%, we will need to make recurring budget cuts in order to balance the budget. These have been reviewed with the City Council and will be discussed further at the August 31st budget workshop, in addition to some other materials requested by City Council. Council, you've seen these all before, just putting these up here for general knowledge, but I won't read through the list. Long-term implications of adopting tax rates less than the effective tax rate plus 3%, as identified by our financial policies, will result in degradation of city infrastructure such as streets, sidewalks, drainage, and traffic systems. There will be no debt capacity in the CIP for things like the Fort Bend Mobility Bond projects, the city's share, the public safety training facility, the second phase of the police and court expansion, and replacement of the city's enterprise software management system, and license plates recognition cameras phase 2, which is expansion into the rest of the city. It's currently only in District 1. These projects are not currently in the CIP, but without the capacity generated from the effective tax rate plus 3%, as our debt declines, we would not be able to afford these projects. Back in 2013, the city called a bond election for park projects to give the voters a say in funding wants that would result in a tax increase to avoid cutting into funding for needs. The messaging to the public at that time showed that we can fund the capital and operational needs within the existing forecast capacity based on our financial management policy direction to budget and forecast at the effective tax rate plus 3%. The financial impact of the park bond projects was all based on the assumption that we would adopt the effective plus 3% every year. Without that, the recurring financial analysis would be totally different. There were 3 propositions on the ballot totaling $50 million that would have resulted in a 5-cent impact if all of those had passed, which is roughly 1 cent for every 10 million in projects. 2 of the 3 propositions totaling $31.5 million were approved by the voters, and by that math, it is a 3.1 cent impact to the tax rate to implement those projects. To date, we have only increased 0.7 of a cent as a result of those projects.
Jim,
yes, sir.
If I remember correctly, today we put in about 20 million.
Correct.
31.5 million. That equates to about a 2 cent increase. We're taking 0.7 of a cent. We've been carrying that, which is what we told our citizens we do. We've been carrying that to the tune of $2 million a year. $1 million of that is for debt service. $1 million of that is for maintenance and operations. And bottom line, the decision right now, we can't afford to carry that. At the current level of revenues that we're seeing with a reduction in both the sales and use tax, and we've also seen a reduction in the assessed value on the overall tax roll. Many of us have seen more than 1.53% for residential values. But many people have seen less. And then the other part was the commercial values have come in far less than what we've seen. I know since I've been on council, less than 4%. So the effect of our main sources of revenue being down, and the effect of the fact that we elected, as we told the public we would do, we elected not to take the tax increase off the park bonds. That's all come to where we are right now.
The city has other funding sources in the budget that are restricted and cannot legally be used to support general government operations. These are things like our economic development sales tax, which are our 4A and 4B corporations, the tourism fund, which is supported by hotel occupancy taxes, and the utility fund, which is an enterprise fund for the operations of the water and wastewater system, supported by user fees from our water and wastewater charges. The city spending any of these funds has 0 impact on the property tax rate. For example, the University Boulevard Bridge is primarily funded by developer contribution. The city is only managing the project with less than $4 million into the whole project. And that's taking it from 98 all the way to completion of the bridge. Phase 2 is fully funded by the developer. The Texas State Technical College and public art funding came from Sugarland 4B Corporation and tourism funds, both of which are legally restricted. Constellation Field and Smart Financial Center were funded as well from restricted sources, 4A, 4B, and tourism. There were no property taxes used in either one of those projects. Historically, the city has constrained residential tax bill growth to an average annual increase of 3%. This has been done through increases to the homestead exemption as well as adjustments to the tax rate to keep it at the effective rate plus 3%. Our policy works, and we have consistently made up approximately 15% of the total tax bill in the entire time that I've been with the city, which is 17 plus years. There are funding sources in the proposed budget similar to those that I just described on the previous sources, but those cannot be used to lower tax bills. Based on the city's average residential value of $379,530 with a 10% homestead, the 2017 tax bill at each of the tax rates, the 31595, which is the current tax rate, would be $1,079.21, which is a 2141 increase from 2016. At the effective tax rate plus 3% of 32.233 cents, the tax bill would be $1,101.01, which is a $43.21 increase, which is $21.80 more than it would be at the $31,595. At the maximum tax rate that's posted, the tax bill would be $1,127.44, which is an increase of $69.65 over the 2016 tax bill, and that's a $48.24 difference from the $31,595. At this time, staff recommends City Council receive and hear all persons wishing to speak on the proposed tax rate for 2017. There is one more public hearing scheduled for September 5th at 6 p.m., and then the final tax rate will be acted on September 19th at 5:30 p.m. here in the council chamber.